Hey there, Internet. Welcome to the Hard on Gear channel, where I discuss and review my used and abused knives and gear so that you know what is or isn't worth spending your hard-earned money on. Time for the full review of one of the most popular folding knives of all time, the 940 from Benchmade, the Osborne 940-2 in this particular case. As always, I tend to go into pretty good detail into the specs and specifics of these knives in these knife reviews. There will be some timestamps down below in the description if you want to skip ahead to anything in particular. I'll get through a lot of the specs and the basic stuff that you're probably looking for in the first 10-15 minutes, and then I'll save a lot of my little hypothetical, ridiculous BS for the end. The Benchmade 940 line, we'll just include all the 940s in this case, is essentially one of the top-selling models from Benchmade knives. Probably only competitive with the Griptilian and the Bug Out lines. So back in 1979, Benchmade started out as Bally-Song in the state of California, and eventually they transferred over to Oregon in, I think, the mid to late 80s, and then in around 1988, I think, they were officially changed over to the Benchmade name, and somewheres in that time period they moved over to Oregon City, Oregon, where the current main facility for Benchmade knives still remains. So the 940-2 is one of the more evolved models of the Osborne 940 line. Originally, you had the 940, which was green aluminum handle scales with a big purple back spacer, closed back design. Then you had the 940-1, which was the first open back version with the carbon fiber handle scales and S90 V blade steel, I do believe. But you're certainly paying an extra, $80 to $100, something around those lines. My timeline could be off here, but I believe the 940-1 was around like 2014, 2015. It could have been earlier than that, but I think that's about right. Then in 2016, the 940-2 came out, which upgraded to G10 handle scales for a little bit less money, S30V blade steel. So you're paying about $20 less for this one actually than you are for the aluminum handle version, at a little bit rounder edges, a little more comfortable ergonomic build. Now you can also get the 945, the mini Osborne, which is a little bit smaller with less than 3-inch blade if you've got blade length restrictions in your state or country or province, wherever you're living. And it's, I think, about 6.75 inches overall, whereas this one's closer to a little bit under 8 inches with a 3.4-inch blade. And just to give you the prices of those, in US dollars, the original 940 is going to run you about $190 to $200, depending on where you're shopping at. Or if you're feeling like you want to get fancy, you can pay about $270, around that, for the S90V carbon fiber 940-1. I paid $232 for the 940-2 in Canadian dollars. And the 945 mini Osborne costs are about the same as the 940-2. There's not a whole lot of price difference in there, which is funny for the material difference. Ooh, and I did see something about a 20th anniversary special edition to kind of commemorate Warren Osborne, the knife designer. He passed away in 2016. He was a Australian rancher that lived in Texas. He wanted to create a knife that gave you the balance of a work-capable, fairly rugged, well-built, durable folding knife, but also something that was a little bit sleek enough that you could still throw it into a suit pocket or something of those sorts, or just throw it into your pants going to a funeral or to church or something like that. The 20th anniversary edition, like I was speaking about, has a titanium set of handle scales, which is pretty cool, and S90V blade steel. Ooh, it also has red back spacers instead of the green ones like are in the 940-2. And the 940-1, the carbon fiber version, has blue barrel spacers instead of the green, and like I mentioned, the original 940 has that full back spacer. Oh, and did I mention that that titanium handled S90V special edition was $400? Just in case you were wondering, that's $400 US. So probably looking at about $500 Canadian. So I'm probably going to hold off on that, although it is a pretty sweet knife if you're a big fan of the Osborne 940 design. Ooh, and it also has red studs as well as the red barrel spacers. So it does have a pretty good look to it, just not for $500. But I had to add this afterwards, but I totally forgot to mention the 9400 from Benchmade, which is the automatic version of the 940. Same exact knife, except instead of the axis lock, you have the button deploy and release, I guess. But it is a side opening automatic knife. Pretty damn cool. It's just you click and flies open on you. That is also in a green with, I want to say, like a pink or a purple backspacer, but check the 940 or the 940-100. Wow, the 9400 9400 Benchmade automatic knife. If you like an automatic version of this, that's going to cost you, I think, only about maybe $20 more. It's not that much more expensive. Might be a little bit more. But can't buy them in Canada, so you won't see that on this channel, unfortunately. You can also get the 940-2 and I believe the original 940s, most of these versions, with a combo edge if you want that partial serration that goes up to about 30-40% of the blade, or you can go with the full belly design like myself and a lot of people go with. So I almost picked this knife up for my replacement EDC for the Recon 1 after 8 years of using and abusing this knife and finally beating the crap out of it to the point where it's pretty wore down and I wanted a replacement. I ended up getting the Manix 2 instead, but it was a pretty close battle between the Manix 2, the Spyderco Paramilitary 2, and the Benchmade 940-2. Coincidentally, the model names all end with 2. But because this is a little bit lighter, a little bit smaller, and a little bit less, I think, hard use approved for what I would typically want out of a folding knife, I ended up going with the Manix 2 because that is sort of Spyderco's staple, well, this and the Shaman, you could say, are two of Spyderco's staple, hard use, kind of overbuilt folding knives that you could get away with doing a lot of tasks that you wouldn't get away with doing with, say, some more well, not to say this is a flimsier knife, but it definitely feels less overbuilt, and it feels like if I'm going to break one of these two, it's probably going to be this one before that Manix 2 goes down. So let's look at some size comparisons. First off, let's take another look at that Manix 2 and put that next to there. They're somewhat similar knives. It's definitely different handle designs and ergonomics, but relatively similar as far as the materials, the blade steels. Then we'll pull the Recon 1 out there, which was the knife that I carried for about 8 years as my main pocket companion. I use that thing for everything, and it is about 9 inches overall in length, which makes these smaller knives at about 8 or a little bit less than 8 inches look pretty tiny. There's the Kershaw Blur, which is a little bit shorter than the Osborne 940-2, similar profile actually to the Manix 2. And there's your Wrap Model 2. Still looking to get a Wrap Model 1 here soon, but there's a few different ones for you to get a pretty good comparison. So time to get into the specs, but first I'm just going to mention really quickly that I finally set up a Patreon for this channel. I did not plan on doing that this early until I felt like I'd added more value to the knife community, but I got a request to set one up and I kind of appreciated that, so I figured, hey, if people are willing to start supporting me this early, then I'll be able to buy more knives to use and abuse on this channel and destroy for your pleasure. The early patrons of this channel will receive plenty of good perks and input on what kind of knives I'm purchasing and what kind of videos are being created, so if you're interested in supporting the channel that way, that would be a great way to do it, as well as using the Amazon affiliate links down below. If you want to click through those links and do your Amazon purchases, whether that's knives, gear, or anything else, that will help support the channel by giving me a little kickback at no cost to you. The overall length of this knife, just under 8 inches. If you look it up, you're going to see that it's 7.87 inches in total length, with a blade length of 3.4 inches, just a little bit less of that in cutting surface, as you got this little forward finger choil, or sorry, not forward finger choil, the sharpening choil down here at the base of the blade, which, while it does take a little bit of your cutting surface away and does give you a little bit of an ability to hang up there, you can get a little bit better of a sharpening job starting off from the very base of the blade, and it does actually let you choke up there a little bit, but I wouldn't really recommend doing that too much for any kind of real cutting tasks. So the handle is just shy of 4.5 inches, 4.47 inches, so if you fold this up in your pocket, that's what you're getting, a little bit, about 4.5 inches worth of knife. Pretty good blade stock on the actual base of this, although as you can see with this strange reverse tanto and interesting swedge they've got going on here, it gets pretty thin for a bit and then thickens out quite a bit towards the tip so that you get a fairly sturdy tip, but you still have well, I think it's described as still being able to cut like most clip point style blades while having the tip strength of more of a tanto. Maybe like 2.5, about 2.5, 3 millimeters of blade stock at the base. However, it gets pretty thin and then gets about about 2 millimeters thick around the thickest part of the tip. Thickness behind the edge comes up at 0.12 inches, which is as far as what the blade specs tell me. So it does get pretty thin behind there, but it's certainly not the sliciest thing in the world, as you got some thick, chunky stuff going on in the back of the blade. So I need to grab myself a scale for this channel. This food scale is a little bit funky, but it's a little off. This should be coming up 2.65. We're getting 2.6. But if you look at something like the, man, it doesn't flick open very well. The Recon 1 from Cold Steel should be at 5.23 ounces. That's coming up 5.1, so you're seeing a little bit of funkiness here, but anyways, gives you the general idea. A Manix 2 from Spyderco comes in at about, should be 5 ounces. You're getting about half the weight in the Benchmade 940-2. So 2.65 ounces in total for the 940-2. So as mentioned before, this comes with black G10 handles on the 940-2 with the green barrel spacers in the back. And of course we've got the S90V blade steel, as you'll find on most standard Benchmade products, as well as most standard Spydercos and many other knife brands use for their baseline steels. Cold Steel recently in the last few years have gone to S35 VN, which is essentially just a slightly different and very slightly upgraded version of S30V. So very popular blade steel. One of the best overall blade steels if you're looking for relatively easy sharpening with good stainless properties, good edge retention, and fairly decent toughness. It is a little bit hard if you're looking to do a lot of like hacking and chopping tasks. You're going to get some chips eventually, and it's going to be a bit of a pain to sharpen. But S30V is the only super steel that I currently own. This and the Manix 2 from Spyderco, both in S30V. God, I hate when I fail a deployment like that. But grade blade steel, I've been having lots of fun testing it out in the last 5-6 months, and I'm sure these won't be my last S30V knives. So we've got a T8 pivot and T6 body and clip screws. I've already stripped a couple of those pocket clip screws out when I was changing it over, just because I'm using a kind of crappy tool. I need to pick something better up. Woe is me. I should do that and stop complaining about it in my videos. It's a blow-through design. You can see that there's no full liners in there. It's the G10 handle scales with some nested, what do they call them, countersunk liners sitting in there just to give it a little bit extra strength and to give the screws, I guess, something to bite into. And you can see it's cut out in a few different areas, like where the axis lock rides through that little groove in that stainless steel liner. There's jimping on that part of the liner where you get a little bit extra grip inside of that front choil position, as well as that jimping on the back, which actually is just about right. It could be a little bit more aggressive, but I mean, this whole knife doesn't really scream like super grippy aggressiveness like the Manix 2 excessively jimped outer edges in the grip. So bronze, I believe, yeah, phosphor bronze washers in that pivot. If you, actually the nice thing about these knives, which I haven't done yet because it's only been about 4 months or so since I've got this knife, but you can undo the pivot screw here and actually remove the blade without taking apart the axis lock or anything else in the knife. Which, what the hell's stopping me from trying it out, I guess. So T8. Shouldn't be messing with that tension, actually. I should have probably showed you first how it was operating, but I guess you kind of seen it's really smoothened out after my first couple of videos, if you haven't seen those. Let's see if I can get this in there without hurting myself. Pull that. Ah, there it is. There's the pivot, there's the screw, and there's the blade. And my washers are stuck in there because they're a little gunked up because I've been rocking this in my pocket 4 months. Yeah, so nothing to that. You could put a little bit of cleaner on this and get some of the gunk and some of the buildup off of there. There's not a whole lot yet because, like I've said, I've only had this for a few months and I haven't really put this through a ton of really hard use. In fact, I'd say the current use and abuse rating of this knife so far for what I've used it for and how aggressive I've used it, I'm going to put it at about a 5. Most of the actual wear and tear I've used it for has been, it's been my main steak knife, so I've been using this to cut food, so it's been used on a lot of ceramic plates. So it has gotten some use and abuse. It has got some use doing some carving tasks, and I've cut a few branches and that kind of thing. But overall, this has been a meat cutter, and it's been, the edges definitely have to been touched up a few times after getting so many, scrapes across ceramic like that. Man, that is some light without that freaking blade inside of there. In fact, let's just see. Yeah, so 1.5 ounces for the handle, and then I guess another ounce for the blade, pretty much. So just in case you're wondering the spread, about 1.5 ounces, about an ounce. So let's see how easy this goes. Okay, so that was on this side, and I'm going to want to slide that on top. I think Nick Shabazz has a video on how to do this properly. I should have watched that before going through this fumbling mess. Oh, so close. Ooh, I know, this should be really safe. Don't try this at home. Oh, come on, Manix. Oh, no, no, no. Go back. Okay, this is a giant pain in the ass. I really hope someone in the comment section has some words of wisdom for me so nobody has to do it quite like this.
Disengage the axis lock. Okay, well that didn't go super well, but that's okay.
Okay, Nick Shabazz says, also disengage the axis lock, so that's why it couldn't quite fit in there. Once I do this once, I'm sure I'll have it down. Not a big fan of this process so far. Oh, and I almost forgot, I should probably lube these suckers up a little bit. That's pretty good. Now those are both pretty lubed up. Now it's going in. Now, if I can just, without cutting myself or doing anything too foolish. Okay, okay. Ooh, come on. Oh, it's got to go in there. That's got to go in there. Don't want to force it. Just slide in there, nice and easy. Oh, there it is. There it is. It's in. Oh, it's in. Let's tighten that up real quick. So, not get this too tight. Let's just see. Okay, so how's that? Too tight. Too tight. Back in there. Ooh, a little bit too loose maybe. Really lubed up though. Any blade play? Maybe just a hair. Yeah. All right, so that was a lot more work than I thought it was going to be, and that whole video sequence is going to be a pain in the ass to edit. So yeah, that's the pivot, which was a bit of an issue at first, but I'll talk about that in a minute as I get into the lock, which the axis lock is pretty cool. It's pretty awesome. I was very interested in trying it after getting to use the ball bearing lock from Spyderco with the Mannix 2 for a little bit. What this does is send a little round spherical ball bearing up into behind the blade tang, and it's pretty damn strong, and it's a big coil spring, a single coil spring that's shoving that ball bearing up into that lock position. With the Benchmade 940 and most Benchmade knives with the axis lock, which is basically all Benchmade knives for the most part, you've got the 2 Omega springs, which are shaped like the Omega Greek letter, and I'll show you a little picture of those up there. They're pretty tiny. They have a reputation for breaking. Not often, but in some Benchmade knives. So I believe Benchmade will, with the warranty, replace those for you if they break through natural use. It was a little bit flimsier than I expected it to be. Like, it felt a little bit more like a toy, the axis lock in particular. I guess this whole knife, if you listen to my first unboxing video, it kind of felt like a toy to me compared to the knives I'm used to handling. But I got a little bit surprised at first because after I flung this open quite hard with a thumb deploy, the axis lock was actually stuck up in this top position. And I've, well, you know what? I haven't experienced that in a while, but just because I flung it open with such enthusiasm, it does get a little bit stuck there, which you can probably hear. Not so, well, that little bit there. Not so much here, and maybe just the lube job actually. Maybe that done something interesting to it. But to be honest, it's been phenomenal the last couple of months, but it took about a month or so for me to break it in with that axis lock. And there's a fellow named, I believe, Mark Josh, went through the effort of taking this apart over and over again to be able to look at the axis lock and see exactly what was going on. In the end, he determined that there was a little bit of sanding and shaving that needed to be done up at the top of the axis lock, I guess that rail inside of the liner where it's cut out. Once he did that, it worked perfectly. I just decided I would not take the axis lock apart and just continue to wear it in and break it in by fiddling with it all the freaking time, because even more so than the Mannix 2 or any other knife that I've had, I've been fiddling around with the Benchmade 940-2 like crazy all the time, and largely because it's actually pretty quiet to fiddle with it. So after that first unboxing video and a little bit of disappointment, a little bit of hesitation on my part as to whether or not I really did like this knife, and if that quality control issue from Benchmade, which is not an uncommon thing unfortunately, was that going to be a big enough issue that I was going to not enjoy this knife? And 4 weeks later, I made a video describing just how much I do love this knife and how much I believe, which it has come to fruition, how much I would enjoy this knife going forward. I believe over time I'll end up using this a little bit more hard than I have been currently. I just wanted to make sure I enjoy this expensive ass knife. For me, it's an expensive ass knife anyways, before I do anything too damaging to it. But if I ever do damage that lock or the Omega springs or anything else on this knife, I'll be sure to let you know. So the blade style is technically reverse tanto is what they call it, which it is there's kind of that tanto sharp angle, and it's just, instead of being on the bottom like there it is. Okay, there's that M16 10K SF. That's a tanto right there. There's what they're calling a reverse tanto. And the idea here was to have a blade style that gave you the utilitarian benefits of a clip point style blade and a little bit more of a rugged tip like a tanto. It cuts quite nice actually. I've used this for quite a bit of different tasks now. I'll plug some different videos here of me cutting up some meat, and I did a lot of, I'm kind of getting footage for a comparison video between the Mannix 2 and the Benchmade 940-2. So I've sliced and diced up quite a few potatoes and steak, and like I mentioned, I've used this as my main steak and dinner knife for the last several months. And I gotta say, it cuts pretty damn good. Not as slicey as the Mannix 2, as this is just a little bit more of a, well, slicey blade, but it's still pretty damn slick, and that long blade gets you lots of room and time to get a nice slice through just about anything you're cutting. Now, I've touched this thing up quite a bit with different hones and with the Landscape Blade Medic, and I think with the stones once. So it's had a decent edge maintained on it, but I don't know how. Well, it's still pretty slicey. Probably not nearly push cutting sharp though, because like I say, I use this almost every day. Ooh, decent spot there, decent spot, but that's probably so close. The only push cut we're gonna get from this guy. But if that's at all important to you at all, probably not. Regardless, it's cutting very nice. Not, well, a little bit of an issue down by the start of that. The sharpening tool helps, but I'm still not a perfect sharpener. But you're getting some pretty nice cuts through that paper. There's not much for options. A lot of Benchmade, you can use the customizable a Benchmade creation shop or whatever on the site and pay a little extra to get a custom variant of handle scale, color, and or blade style. The 940 is one of the Benchmade knives that is not on that list currently, and this is pretty much what you're getting, is that reverse Tanto style blade. And yeah, you can get the combo edge version if you want a little bit of serration in there too. And go a little more of the cutting performance, let's just see my old trusty piece of oak here, how that goes. And well, it certainly doesn't bite like a lot of different blades. And again, this has not been like super well maintained. Let me just give this sucker a quick stropping. A bit of a stropping, and we're getting not, well, about a decently hair popping sharp edge on there. So translated to the oak, yeah, it's biting a little bit better now, but still, this is not a whittling knife. This is a full flat grind that is not really designed to do this kind of stuff. A lot of different small fixed blades actually do a much better job than what this one does. But it will hack some branches off. It's just a light knife with not a lot of weight behind it. It's got a long blade, but not a very thick, heavy-bellied blade. Let's test that tip out. Drill some holes here. Looks like little ant holes in there. Yeah. Tip. Pretty good. You don't get deep penetration in there because that tip is so thick because of that reverse Tanto sort of that thickening out of the blade stock again towards the end. So it goes in, but you really have to work to get that tip in there, although that's not really what the knife is designed for. So it's interesting because this is one of the most popular folding knives in the last 20 years. Maybe not one of the most sold, but certainly one of the most revered, top rated. It's hard to find a bad review on the internet of this knife, but its cutting performance compared to things like the Manix 2 or like I'm sure the PM2 or any other very popular models out there, it's not quite there. The blade style is a little bit different, but this is supposed to be able to last. It's not supposed to be a super slicer. It's supposed to be, well, the way Warren Osborne designed it, again, to be a fancy knife that you could, well, fancy-ish knife that you could take into a fancy place, and one that you could also use on a ranch as he was a rancher, so that you could basically get away with doing most hard-use knife tasks without having to worry about breaking a delicate tip or chipping the blade. We'll keep the Manix 2 out while we talk about the ergonomics and the feel in hand of this thing. So it did catch me off guard how tiny it was. I kind of expected it to be a little bit bigger, or at least feel a little bit larger in my hand. But keep in mind that, again, I'm used to using the Recon one, which feels plenty large in the hand, just about no matter whose hand you're using. And the Manix 2, which is the king of comfort by many people's standards, as you've got all these lovely positions to stick your hands, and the jimping and the choil positions and all that just allow for so much versatility and comfort and, well, safe use while you're using this for different tasks. Compared to that, the Benchmade 940-2 just doesn't stack up. If we're calling the ergos on the Manix 2, we'll say like maybe a 9 for the ergonomic value overall. I'd maybe put the Benchmade 940, if I can get a hold of it, 940-2. Yeah, ergonomically, probably like a 7. Still not bad. As far as a knife that I would use on a regular basis, which I do, I feel like I'm going to get hot spots on this a little bit quicker. I know different people have issue with this pocket clip digging into their hands. I'm not the toughest hands in the world, but I've got decently ruggedized hands with decent little, I guess, I don't feel a lot of pain when I get little hot spots. I don't tend to get blisters too easy, although it is possible. And I don't really notice that pocket clip digging into my hand, although some people will find that to be an issue. But overall, I really enjoy the way my thumb sits on this back of this thick blade stock quite nicely. And if I'm using the knife, it's normally in this fashion, and it feels pretty damn good. It's just, again, compared to something like this, I prefer a little bit more of a thick handle, something that fills my hand, so I can really bear down almost like a full fist and go to work on it without feeling like my fingers are kind of getting crunched up or overlapping onto each other. Talk about that pocket clip and the carrying of this knife. That's a pretty standard, decent pocket clip for this Benchmade knife. It's kind of long, but it carries quite nice. The spoon here, kind of similar to the Benchmade Spyderco spoon clip. It allows you to get your finger in there pretty easily, and it's hard to miss that once you get a good grip on that. It sticks out of the pocket a little bit. You can get a deep carry clip if you want to get Benchmade to send you one. However, for me, I'm in Canada. I don't want to be concealing my knives. I don't want to look like I'm concealing my knives because then I can get myself in trouble legally. Probably not going to happen, but why not just not take the risk? I've been carrying this in my offhand pocket on my right side just because I've always got it for a food knife, and it's just fun to fidget with. If I want to deploy it quietly, I can just sort of play with it like this and just keep myself occupied, give myself something to distract or I guess focus my train of thought, as silly as that sounds to some people. But it's carried beautifully. I honestly forget it's in there. I'll throw this into my pocket if I'm just doing something in shorts, or if I'm down in the basement. Sometimes I just do my squats and deadlifts and all that kind of stuff with this Mannix 2 in my pocket, and I don't really notice it until I think about it. With this thing, it absolutely disappears, and you don't know it's there at all. At least I certainly don't remember half the time that I've got this in my pocket if I'm only wearing a pair of gym shorts. So you could slip this pretty much anywhere. I think this would actually carry pretty well in a front pocket of a shirt, or a suit jacket, or whatever people wear to fancy events. Because it is only, again, 2.5 ounces, so you're not really even going to feel it or notice it there too much. But you've only got tip up for the carry on this, which is just fine, because who the hell wants to carry a tip down knife? Sorry, tip down people, I just don't understand where you're coming from. I've heard the arguments, I've seen the videos, I just don't quite get it. To me, it feels so much more natural to pull that out, my thumb's already there, and I deploy. Speaking of deployment, how does this thing deploy? Well, the thumb stud works pretty well, although I was a little bit disappointed as to how it did take me a little bit of maybe a couple of weeks to get really used to it. I actually definitely hurt my thumb a little bit just overdoing it, and I played with this knife so much the first few days, the first week or so especially, and I kind of got a little bit of a bruise and sort of peeled my thumbnail off that a little bit, which I've done with a lot of my new knives, so what can I say about that other than I could probably not fiddle with them as much. But it's hard to help, and I figure whatever, my fingers will adapt and get tougher. But it certainly isn't as easy to hit as the Mannix 2 from Spyderco. The Spyderco big round hole, this is the only Spyderco I've owned and handled, so I can't say across all Spydercos, but that Spyderco round hole is so hard to miss. You're gonna hit it pretty much every time once you get used to deploying this knife. The thumb stud on the Rat Model 2, a little bit protruding from the frame of the knife. Pretty damn large, actually, if you look relative to a lot of other thumb studs. But for the most part, I gotta say, I like the thumb studs on this much better, and I feel like I'm almost never gonna miss that. Reverse flick, pretty easy if you get your hand in the right spot, although it's a pretty tiny knife. It's pretty hard to miss that thumb stud. Recon 1, same thing. I've got it switched on the right-hand side right now, but that's a big old thumb stud, hard to miss. Even with the thumb stud on the opposite side, I can still get a pretty decent deployment and get that open without too much issue. Not to say it's super difficult with the 940-2, but if you're in a hurry or you've got to open this in some kind of a stressful situation, you're going to maybe miss that a few times. As far as its retention, it holds in there pretty well. You can do that little reverse drop flick fairly easy with this knife because the blade is so long, and I think a lot of the weight at the tip helps it sort of fly open like that if you wanted to deploy it like that for whatever reason. But for the most part, it doesn't really fall out or fly out of there if you drop the knife, or if you, if you do that, it seems to open quite easy. But if you're just regularly opening this or carrying this, not a big deal. I may have had this, yes, I definitely did. I did it with the Rat Model 1, had a picture of that too. But I did once have this sort of partially open like that, reach in my pocket and stab myself very slightly in the knuckle. That's fine. It taught me to pay more attention when I reach in my pockets when I have knives in there. Makes sense, right? But it does stay in there quite a bit. The detent is strong enough that you shouldn't have much of an issue. It stays open once you hit about there. You've got about an inch or inch and a half of plating there before you have to worry about that flying open on you when you're not supposed to have it open. Don't do that, by the way. That's dangerous because you can close it on your fingers. Well, let's talk about Benchmade as a brand right quick, and just very quickly, if anyone did not know, Benchmade's originally famous for their butterfly knives. The original name was Balisong. They, the butterfly logo is, of course, because they were a butterfly knife manufacturer and still are, and they still do make plenty of good Balisongs. If you're into that kind of thing, I'm not. It's Canada, you cannot own anything like that. Those are illegal and considered a restricted weapon, more or less. Anything gravity knife, balisong, automatic with a button. If it's anything beyond a spring assist where you're deploying with the blade, that's fine. If it's a assisted flipper tab, that's fine. But anything that has a button or basically a gravity opening or anything like that, illegal. There's also the running joke that you're paying the butterfly tax on all Benchmade knives, which is of course about 50 to 60 bucks probably for this stupid butterfly on here, because most knives with these same materials, with this same sort of same workmanship put into them, tend to be about 50 to 60 or more dollars cheaper than most of your Benchmade models. I give a pretty good intro to the Benchmade 940 and to Warren Osborne in the intro of the video, but Benchmade company, the company's been around for a long time. They've got a decent reputation as one of the leading knife manufacturers in the world. However, the quality control issue, they're quite famous for it over the last few years. They supposedly have gotten better, although this knife was purchased in early 2021, and I had well, the issues that I had with it in the earlier video when I unboxed this thing. Part of what you're paying for, I'm sure, is their killer warranty, because they do have one of the best warranties in the market. It's a lifetime warranty. If you have any issues with this knife, or the axis lock or the Omega springs break, or you get a chipped or damaged blade, they will replace it for you. I think, well, you know, they're going to ask questions, but as long as you've got a decent reason and you're not doing anything too stupid with your knife, you shouldn't have an issue. But overall, pretty decent warranty. They've also got that, what is it, Life Sharp service, where they're going to allow you to send it in, like not just them, but many other knife companies do this, but you can send your knives in to Benchmade, your Benchmade knives, and they'll sharpen them for you for free. I think you just got to pay the shipping. What about ambidexterity for this knife? As a left-handed individual, that's always something I'm looking for, and in a knife like this, where it's something I was considering carrying on a regular and daily basis, which I have been as a backup knife, well, ambidexterity is a big thing for me. So again, no tip down carry for this, which who cares, but the tip up option allows me to switch it to my left hand side so that I can draw it from my left hand and deploy it the right way, the way it's supposed to be deployed, from the right position. The axis lock is of course ambidextrous. It's pulled down with, you can technically pull it down with either your thumb or your index finger. However, it's probably not the best to unevenly wear those springs down over time, and I would imagine it's just better to do it the proper way, which is use both buttons, but it's good to practice with both hands and get ambidextrous yourself. So I guess really, other than the fact that the pivot is on one side, which does not matter for regular use, this knife is completely ambidextrous, depending of course which side you have the pocket clip on. So is this a Sou'paw approved knife? Absolutely, very Sou'paw approved. It is a very ambidextrous knife, very handy if you're left-handed and you're looking for a fantastic light EDC knife. As far as the aesthetics and the public presentation, we'll say, of this knife, it's certainly not as scary as things I used to carry. Again, the Recon one does draw a lot of attention when you haul it out in most places. The Osborne 940 you could carry pretty much anywhere and nobody's going to give you too much grief about it. Aesthetically, it's also very pleasing. It's definitely the prettiest knife that I've got, if you were going to call knives pretty, compared to most of the stuff that I have. It's not exactly things that you would want to dress up or bring anywhere out to a fancy dinner. So very pleasing to the eyes, very well built. You can tell a lot of the time and effort and probably money that was put into this, and goes into the cost of this, is probably the aesthetics and the extra detail and the attention to detail as far as the handle scales and the blade profile and all that. Don't know if it's worth $230 Canadian for that extra stuff. It's probably a $150 knife, or in the States, probably something more like $120 to $130 knife, as far as what it feels and the blade materials and all that. But I guess you're paying that extra bit for, again, the butterfly tax, which is hilarious, and the extra bit of design and care as far as the looks go. Feel, reliability, and durability, this is probably not going to hold up as much as a lot of the knives that I prefer to carry. I don't know yet, and over time I will certainly find out and let you know if this thing does fail in the field on me. The Omega springs being the biggest concern. I don't really like how much dirt and grit can get into there with those little tiny springs. I was nervous with the Manix 2 and the ball bearing lock for that same reason. I use my knives in the woods a lot, and to be honest, on Wildfire, I haven't really been taking this out a lot because I don't want to have to take it apart and clean it. It voids the warranty, and these ball bearing and axis locks are a pain in the ass to deal with once they're apart. You've seen how bad I am just dealing with the pivot. Let's not go to that next level with those locks if I don't have to. But this is still just one single coil spring, and it's got a good reputation for being easy to clean and lasting in the field. These Omega springs, it's not the most common thing in the world, but it does happen to people. And if you lose those springs, if you break one, maybe you'll be fine. If you break, well, one in the field and then you get some grit in there, it's probably going to turn into a mess real fast. And I imagine the other one's probably going to get more wear and tear and break a lot easier. But the blade style really does allow it to, say, last in most hard use tasks. When I was just playing around in that oak, the tip didn't feel like it was even slightly able to be compromised. I felt no wiggle in the pivot, no blade play. It really does feel like this would last quite a while. And of course, it was designed to be a hard use ranch style, a field knife. The other nice part about it is there's pretty easy maintenance and cleaning to this thing. So long as you don't, again, bust one of those Omega springs or have some damage with your axis lock. It's got a blow through design, which the original 940 did not, so you can clean that with a Q-tip pretty easily. I use just some compressed air most of the time to give this a quick cleaning every few weeks or so. Well, I guess it's probably been a couple of months. You can see the lint is quite built up in there. Very easy to clean, very easy to maintain. A little bit of oil in the pivot goes a long way with these things. Those bronze washers push dirt and everything out quite easily, and they're not that hard to clean with, again, a little bit of compressed air, then a little bit of lubrication, and you're back to pretty much like new. And I'll show you what was in the box. Basically, this is the standard Benchmade box. Pretty shiny, looks pretty fancy. I've got lube on my fingers. And the manual here for the Benchmade gives you just your basic instructions of what to do with it, and there's your Life Sharp service and warranty, or all that warranty information, just general knife stuff that's in most of these packages. Oh, and it did come in this fancy little sleeve, which was kind of a odd surprise. But again, I think I said in the opening and unboxing of this, am I paying $3 on that total for that freaking sleeve? Because I'd happily take $3 or $5 off of that total price to just have it come in a piece of plastic. But I guess I appreciate the extra attention to detail, and that is kind of a nice little bag if you have something to use it for. Or I guess you could store your knives in there if you take better care of them than I do. And time for the crazy stuff, which I'm absolutely not qualified and probably should not be talking about on the internet. But this is only for fun. We're going to talk about some self-defense and hypothetical survival / apocalypse stuff. With that, keep in mind, I am not a professional. I've got about 10 years of working in the field as a forest firefighter and forest technician, and around a lot of people with much more rugged and well-trained bush skills than myself. I just try to learn from the best and filter out as much bullshit as possible. And just to be clear, I do not promote the use of knives as weapons or self-defense tools, especially in Canada where we're not allowed to use such things for such purposes. These are tools, work tools, and I carry them for that purpose. However, I work in the woods a lot, and in the context of self-defense, in this channel, I'm only talking about wildlife self-defense, not people, because we do not attack people or defend ourselves against people in Canada with these things. If you are law enforcement or military or anything like that where you use these things like that, or you're in a state or a country where this is legal to carry as a weapon or self-defense tool, you can listen to it in whatever context you'd like. But just to be really clear, I am not promoting the use, modification, or sale of knives as weapons in any way on this channel at all. Disclaimer over. So defensive and tactical use. Again, not a trained knife tactics person. I've done Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for about 8 years, a little bit of Muay Thai and boxing and different stuff over the years. And last couple years, I have become a very, like a daily Filipino martial arts practitioner / enthusiast, untrained in my basement off of YouTube. Again, just trying to sift through the bullshit and find the most logical and applicable trainers and systems out there. So with that in mind, do I think this is at all a good defensive or tactical knife? Well, pros and cons. Let's say the pros right away. Nice long blade at 3.4 inches with a full belly. You will get decent slicing on things if you're slicing through whatever. Let's say a piece of ham on Christmas dinner or whatever. Penetration-wise, that reverse tanto will allow you to penetrate through most things. Skinny blade profile will allow you to get through ribs of coyotes or bears or whatever you're defending yourself against in the wild. It's light and easy to carry, so there's a good chance you'll have it on you. And anything that you have for, say, defensive capabilities, it's not really useful if you don't carry it. So having something on you like this all the time ensures that you will be comfortable with it if you had to use it. And that's assuming you carry this exact knife all the time without rotating too much. Have a whole video talking about that and why I think if you're actually going to be carrying knives with that defensive mind or tactical mindset, you should probably consider carrying the same thing over and over again once you get used to what you're carrying. Got a whole video talking about that. Kind of dumb and heavily nuanced unless you are in that kind of a situation. If you're a normal EDC rotation person, don't get too offended by it. Just a different kind of perspective if you haven't thought about it before. As far as the pros go, though, I think that's about it. The cons for me right away are that this is kind of not a super grippy knife, and there's not much of a big finger guard here. So if you did get into something, I mean, some tactical knives don't have much more of a finger guard than this, but I kind of like having a little something extra, like the Mannix 2, where you just know, I mean, you could stab into something really, really hard and not have to worry about that sliding up and slicing open your fingers. And this one here is just going to be a bit of an issue if you did happen to slide up, and I don't want to do that. Also, the deployment. That's my number one issue with this, is I've pulled this out and missed that thumb stud many, 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 many times, and you really have to go in and out to get it right. And in a panic situation, if your adrenaline's going through the roof, you might fumble that, and I might even throw it out of your hand just because it's so damn light. But it still deploys quite well. It's not that big of an issue. But again, for a tactical knife or a defensive knife, if that's what you were using it for in that context, but again, this is a work tool, I don't think this was going to be your first choice. It's pretty comfortable, and really, I mean, if you had to move this thing around, you really got really, really nice control, lots of blade length. I feel like you could do a lot worse, but it's not going to be my first choice. Again, what the hell does my opinion even matter in that at all? I'm just talking. Feel free to comment if you've got more experience or you think otherwise. How would this thing fare as an apocalypse knife? Well, let's just go straight up and say, that landed kind of cool. Let's just straight up say that the Omega Springs are not apocalypse approved, at least by my standard. There's just too many stories out there, while not high enough percentage compared to other locking systems, that I know that those are going to fail eventually if this is the only knife that I'm using, or the only pocket knife that I'm using, or a folding knife rather, in an apocalypse-like situation, which doesn't need to be like a crazy zombie apocalypse. It could just be a bad pandemic, or a power shutdown, or God knows, some kind of crazy cyber attack, or whatever weird shit you can imagine. Natural disasters happen countries get overthrown. Crazier stuff has happened all over the world and continues to happen every year and pretty much every day. So just good to think about what you might want to carry if you got into one of those crazy bad situations. And I don't know if an Omega Spring Axis lock knife is going to be it. Other than that, it'd be pretty easy to maintain. You know the blade's probably going to hold up against most things. It's going to be not the easiest thing to sharpen. If you had to use like rocks and find random stuff, you didn't have a good stone set or some kind of a field sharpener on you, might actually want a little bit of an easier to sharpen blade steel. I'd probably want a 1095 for my Apocalypse knife if I had to be honest. The handles are probably going to take some damage over time, but they should hold up. There's lots of good examples of 940. Well, 940-2 has only been around for the last 5 years or so, so we'll see how those hold up over 10-20 years, but the aluminum handle scales have held up just fine. And for the overall hog rating of this knife, my own subjective opinion of how awesome or not awesome I think this knife is as far as its ability to be used, abused, and beat on like something similar to, say, the Recon 1. Something that I've got experience pushing to its limits and understanding that it's pretty much capable of doing most things that knives can do, and a lot of stuff they probably shouldn't be doing. Overall, I got to give this little guy a 7. It's not the best hog rating in the world. It's certainly not going to get a rating like the Cold Steel Recon 1 or the Manix 2 or the Azula 2. Still relatively an awesome knife that I would definitely recommend you picking up. But overall, if I'm talking about a knife that I could get away really beating the living crap out of, it's probably not going to be the Osborne 940-2. Although I wanted something in my collection that was a little bit different, a little bit fancier if I did want to actually throw something in a suit that was still going to be able to... I don't wear suits like, what, maybe 3 times in my life. But regardless, if I had to wear this in some kind of a fancy place, it's probably going to be my choice. It's definitely, at least at this current time, my most expensive knife, and it's probably one that I'm going to hold on to forever. I'm going to try not to beat the crap out of it too much compared to some of my other knives, only because it's so expensive relative to my other stuff, and because, well, this is supposed to be a knife that I'm going to try and use for fancier events, and or if I want to have something that's a little bit lighter and not as scary. Keep an eye out in the future when I do my comparison video between the 940-2 and the Manix 2 from Spyderco. While they are very different knives, I think that'll be an interesting comparison if you were, like me, kind of on the fence of which one of these two to get for a regular EDC knife that you're going to carry on an everyday basis. They might not be the most accurate comparisons to each other, but these similar blade steels, similar handle materials, and well, for me, if you were similar to me and you had these both on your short list as to a knife that you were going to maybe use as a regular EDC, maybe that video will give you a little bit of an extra insight as to which is better for which tasks. If you haven't liked this video, if you like it, give it a dislike if you really thought it was crap. Comment, let me know what you thought I messed up or could have done better in this video, and or if there's any good Benchmade 940-2 stories, or any Benchmade 940, or any Benchmade stories at all that you want to share that you think are relevant. I appreciate anyone who's supporting me on Patreon and helping me get more knives and gear to use and abuse. That money will all go towards knives and maybe some better lighting and sound equipment eventually. And again, the Amazon affiliate links will also give me a little bit of kickback if you want to shop Amazon through those links. And there'll be a knife giveaway at 1,000 subscribers. It's going to be something Hard On Gear approved, probably not the 940-2, but something a little bit more like the Manix 2 or the SE Azula 2 or the Recon 1. Something where I know you will be able to use this knife just about as hard as I'm going to be using mine. Keep an eye out for the updated review in the future, as I will continue to use the crap out of this knife. I know this is going to be in my regular rotation for a long time. It's not typical to what I tend to gravitate towards knife-wise, but it has certainly become one of my absolute favorites. Until next time, this is the Hard On Gear channel, signing off.